It's a huge pleasure for me to be here this morning with all familiar faces and good people around, cream of the cream of swine industry, so it'll be a nice experience to be here this morning. Today we would like to share with you some results that we have of two studies that we completed 2 years ago and open the discussion for understanding vaccines as a tool for control or eradication programs. First, I would like to thank Reed and Dale for the invitation and BI for the invitation to the meeting, and more than for the invitation for organizing this kind of meetings that as a swine practitioner now they are really needed for our practice every day, so it's a very good experience for us to be in this kind of meetings. I know it's not very nice to start talking about myself, but it's just 1 year that I left from Minnesota, and I've been back in practice in Venezuela, and I'm very excited, and it's a huge or great career that what we have and what we do every day. Some days I'm talking about the change that is just starting 4 years, a very intense PhD, and then you go to the field again, try to solve problems. So one day you might have E. coli, post-winning E. coli. Next week you have circovirus. Then you have to deal with reproduction, sometimes with people. And well, look what we have to do to make these people to work. It's another thing. It's a different rhythm. And this is why swine practitioners are very thankful for all the research that is generated in the universities and institutions, because it's very useful for us in the field. But all those problems that I just mentioned are very small compared to the big one, which is PRRS virus. This is why we are all here, and this is why I'm very excited of discussing what you guys are doing, because it keeps being a very tough problem that we face every day in the field. Now, I'm showing you one of the barns in the research farm in Appleton, Minnesota, of the Swine Disease Eradication Center of the University of Minnesota. And I'm showing this barn because when I got to Minnesota, Dr. Pijuan brought me here in 2004, and we had a meeting 2 months after I got here. We had a meeting with Dr. Lee. He said, well, I have a project. I need somebody to run the project. So he took me to the farm. We were, looking at the facilities, and we got to this old barn, and this gate here was stuck, was closed, and we couldn't open it. So he just relaxed and said, try to open it. I tried very hard, and I finally opened the gate, and he smiled and said, you are the man for this project. And even today, I'm not sure if it was, or how could he understand I was very smart and sharp that day, or if he only needed somebody with, strength and work hard. So I prefer to think that he just could see in my face that I was very smart and sharp. Well, we're very intense projects where I think we'll learn very interesting things. Reed and Scott were discussing this idea maybe a couple of years before they started the project, and the initial hypothesis was that repeated mass vaccination with a modified live virus vaccine against PRRS virus will reduce the transmission and persistence of the virus. That was the initial hypothesis of why we wanted to do this. And the main objective, or why we wanted to do this, was to define or to determine if vaccination was important in control and eradication programs, if we could use that as a tool to control and eradicate PRRS virus. We organized all the things that we wanted to learn in 3 big areas. One was we wanted to check if vaccine could reduce persistence of the virus in the tissues of the infected pigs. Then we work with transmission, so how can vaccine reduce the duration of the transmission of the virus? And then how could vaccinated animals respond different to a heterologous challenge or very aggressive virus challenge in the future? We did 2 studies, as I said before. The first study, we basically do a homologous situation. So we infected a population of pigs with PRRS virus, VR2332, which is the parent strain of the vaccine, the MLV VI vaccine. And we did that in order to learn how was it going to work in an ideal situation. And then we moved forward to a more realistic situation, which was a heterologous infection. So now we infected a population with Minnesota 3100. I will explain in in a minute every detail on that. And then we vaccinate with MLV vaccine. So let's concentrate on this study because it's a more realistic, more common situation that we face in the field. In total, we used in the second study 484 previous naive pigs from 6 to 20 weeks old at different times. I will explain the design in a minute. As I said, we use the Ingelvac MLV vaccine. The virus that we use for the first challenge for infecting a population, we use Minnesota 3100. Most of you know this virus because the University of Minnesota has been working with this virus a lot. It's a very mild, clinically mild virus. Doesn't produce a lot of clinical signs or severe clinical signs. It's a very persistent virus, can remain in the tissues for a long time. And then for the second challenge, to see the response or observe a response or against an heterologous challenge, we use Minnesota 184, which is a very aggressive virus that could produce a tremendous clinical disease in the pigs. As diagnostic tools, we rely on PCR, basically quantitative PCR and ELISA. And one of the new things that we could develop here with the help of the Murtag's lab was a strain-specific PCR to identify these three viruses that we were using in this study. Sorry about this busy slide, but I want to show you the experimental design, how the groups were composed. Group A, with 80 pigs, was infected with Bruce virus Minnesota 3100 on day 0. Can you hear me better now? Okay, sorry. Group B, C and D were also infected the same day. On day 0, we infected groups A, B, C, and D with Minnesota 3100. The difference was that Group B received 1 dose of vaccine on day 7, so 7 days after Minnesota 3100, they were vaccinated. Group C received 2 doses at 7 and 37 days, and Group D got, after the infection, 3 doses of MLV vaccine. We had a negative control that remained negative through all the study, and this year, or this study, we included another group, a group only vaccinated that never saw the wild-type virus in that population. So we wanted this group for the second phase of the heterologous challenge to see what would happen with that group that only saw the vaccine virus. So remember 3 objectives that we set at the beginning. Assessment of persistence. So to do that, we randomly select and slaughter every 30 days 10 pigs per group, beginning 30 days after the last vaccination. So at 37 days post-inoculation, we sacrifice 10 pigs from groups A, B, and the negative control. 67 days post-inoculation, we included these 3 groups plus the 2 doses group, and at 97 days of vaccination after infection, we included the group with 3 doses. We went to the slaughterhouse and basically took tonsils, external lymph nodes, and inguinal superficial lymph node, and did PCR on those animals. The assessment of transmission, basically, well, remembering that we inoculated Minnesota 3100 on day 0, so we had 3 groups of sentinels. The first group was introduced to groups A, only infected, and B, infected plus 1 dose, between 37 and 67 days post-inoculation. Those 10 pigs per group that were in a stretch contact with, or very close contact with inoculated animals were sacrificed at 30 days after the introduction. They were, serum samples were taken, and they were sacrificed to check if they got infected during that time of contact. Then the second group of sentinels was introduced to groups A, B, and C between 67 and 97 days post-inoculation, and then third group of sentinels, 10 animals per group, in very close contact to all those inoculated and vaccinated animals, were introduced to each group of the study. The third objective was protection, or what would happen in the face of a heterologous infection. So for that, we took 10 animals per group at 97 days of the first exposure, the first Minnesota 3100 exposure. We took them to the isolation facilities in the university, in St. Paul campus, and we inoculated them with Minnesota 184. Minnesota 184 is a very aggressive virus that shows clinical expression very, very evident. We took samples, serum samples at 0, 1, 3, 7, 18, and 24 days. We weighted the pigs at 0, at 20, and 24 days, and estimate the average daily gain, and we evaluate clinically the animals every day. One different thing that we did in this study, the second study, was to introduce sentinel pigs to those groups that were already exposed and reinfected or reinoculated. So if we inoculated 184 at day 0 of this second phase of the study, all animals 97 days after they saw Minnesota 3100, some of them saw 1 dose of vaccine, some of them 3 doses of vaccine. 3 days after the Minnesota 1800 inoculation, we put one pig, one sentinel, naive, PRRS virus naive pig in one room with 5 originally infected pigs. And we kept them for 21 days in those rooms to see what was the transmission rate or the shedding of the virus from those exposed pigs. Well, just a suggestion for BI. I can find a room for you guys if you want to go there. It's too cold here for me. I'm sorry, but it's nice. They have rooms we can find even with air conditioning. And by the way, I wanted to congratulate you all Americans because all this fantastic democratic demonstration that you showed to the world in the last presidential elections. And I'm very impressed with the transition that everything is how everything is going. When you live in a country with a special democracy, you really appreciate that. So I think that I understand that elections are very expensive, sometimes stressful. This is why in Venezuela we are trying to eliminate them. So next year we won't have more elections there. Okay, let's talk about the results. Okay, first one, mass vaccination did not have a significant effect on the proportion of PRRS virus persistently infected pigs. We were expecting that the proportion of infected pigs would decrease with mass vaccination, but that didn't happen. The persistence or the proportion of persistently infected pigs was decreasing, but it was the same proportion in all the groups. So we kept finding the same proportion of animals in every group. Viral load of those positive pigs, we quantified the virus in the tissues. The viral load in tissue PCR positive pigs was not significantly influenced by vaccination. So you could think that if you mass vaccinate a population, the level or the amount of virus that you can find in tissues could be reduced. We couldn't find that. All the tissues or the virus in the tissues were about the same. And something interesting was that the virus that we recovered from those tissues, even 127 days after inoculation, was basically or predominantly Minnesota 3100. In other words, the mass vaccination or repeated vaccination could not displace the wild-type virus from the pigs or from the tissue of the pigs. Other interesting thing that we found was that transmission to sentinels was not observed in vaccinated groups between 97 and 127 days post-inoculation. So, as you can see here, the first group of sentinels, we introduced 10 pigs in the only infected group, and they always got infected even when we put them between 97 to 127 days post-inoculation. The sentinel pigs got infected from the originally infected population. The group with 1 dose of vaccine, you can see that the sentinels got infected in the first period, the second period, but we couldn't see transmission to the sentinels in the third period. And that's something interesting. The same thing happened with the group of 2 doses and the group of 3 doses. So after 97 days of inoculation, it seems that vaccination could reduce the duration of the shedding of the virus. So the sentinels that we introduced 97 days post-inoculation in vaccinated groups, doesn't matter if it was with 1 dose or 3 doses, didn't get infected from the original population. Then when we took those animals to the isolation facilities and we evaluate clinical signs and viremia and transmission, this is what we observed. Viremic pigs were detected in all the groups after Minnesota 184 inoculation. So even if an animal received only Minnesota 184 or received Minnesota 184 plus 3 doses of vaccine, we always saw virus in those animals, in the serum of those animals. So viremia was not prevented by multiple exposure. This is a resume of clinical signs, and I don't want to get too busy with this chart, but just let's focus on group E. This group E was first time exposed, so they were negative animals that only saw 184 first time. And you can see that all the groups that had seen the virus before in different protocols of exposure, maybe just 184, 3100 or 3100 plus vaccines, they behave very similar. Even the vaccine group, they behave very similar for all the parameters. But the group that saw the virus for the first time, you can see that the temperature at 7 days post-inoculation was different than the other groups. The mortality, we lost 1 pig at 12 days post-184 inoculation here, with characteristically PRRS virus infection or clinical presentation. We lost 1 negative control here because of an intestinal torsion. The reduction in appetite was very evident in that group, and you can see the result of that in the average daily gain. So the average daily gain of the previously exposed groups, even if it was only 1 exposure to the wild-type virus or 1 exposure to the vaccine or multiple exposures, was always larger, more important than in the first-time exposed group, where they only gained 288 grams per day.
Well, what was the period that you measured that growth rate over?
24 days.
But the negative controls weren't weighing?
Yeah, that's a limitation of this study. We only could use 2 negative controls. We lost 1, so didn't have any case to weigh that animal. A matter of space or isolation rooms, we didn't have a lot of space. Okay, the viral load in the tissues of those animals that were positive 24 days after 184 was not affected by previous exposure status. So the previous status of the pig against PRRS virus did not affect the amount of virus that they had in their tissues. And now the virus that we found in those pigs was 184. So I said before that 3100 was persistent in the tissue of the pigs 127 days after the first inoculation, even after the vaccinations. In this case, 184 could move, displace, or substitute the other viruses and be there. Something interesting is that all the sentinels in all the groups became infected by the end of the exposure period. So it didn't matter if it was a naive pig that received a 184, or if it was a pig exposed to 3100 and 3 doses of vaccine. When we put the sentinels 3 days after the 184 inoculation, all the sentinels got infected. In conclusion, application of a modified live PRRS virus vaccine on a population of pigs infected with the heterologous isolate did not have a significant effect on the proportion of PRRS virus persistently infected pigs or viral load in tissues, was not able to eliminate the wild-type virus from the pigs, reduce the duration of shedding of PRRS virus, and significantly improved the clinical response following heterologous challenge, but did not prevent infection or shedding with that new challenge. 3 basic limitations of this study. We made a huge effort to have 80 pigs per group, but still that's not compared to a finishing bound with 1,200 pigs. Selection of the isolates. We tried to find the isolates that were more representative of the situation and try to find a very persistent virus, and 184 that is very prevalent in Minnesota and Iowa, but still we know that it's a limitation and we could try this with other viruses. And then the duration of the studies, as you saw, we stopped the study at 127 days post-inoculation, and we know that maybe a longer period could offer different results. Maybe the vaccine would have time to show more results in a bigger population, in the population. Future studies, we want to test the PRRS virus therapeutic vaccination in herds infected with different heterologous isolates. The testing PRRS virus therapeutic vaccination on area-based PRRS virus PRRS control eradication programs, and to evaluate effects on of this tool in the face of a co-infection as a mycoplasma case. Potential applications, just to close, potential applications for pre-virus mass vaccination. And I know that it could be food for a discussion later, and that's what we need. So hair mass exposure, but don't do that and forget about the other things. We have to still do the hair closure, early weaning, all in, all out, gill acclimation, finishing groups, whatever you want. If you have negative groups that are going to hot areas, or if you have positive groups that you don't want to shed a lot of virus in the area. No populations. If you need to populate a farm in an area that is very high risk, maybe that might be an option. Very short here, without going into detail of the time frame. We have a pre-virus infection. We detect antibodies, clinical signs. There is a viremia period. There is an infectious period, and then you can detect the virus in the tissues. We know that this is what happened, more or less, with a susceptible pig. But what we saw with our results is that with the previously exposed pigs, all those times get shorter. So you can make those times of viremia and shedding shorter. And this is an individual base. But what would happen in a population base is that if we have a susceptible population of pigs, then if this line is a group of animals, those groups of animals will keep the virus circulating in the population. We all know that. So this group is infected now, they infect this group, and the infection keeps going in the farm. If we can, or if we find a tool to reduce those times of shedding of infectiousness, then we will chart all these periods for groups, and then we can get to the point where the virus is not circulating anymore. And that can be the foundation for the success of hair closure. So I think that we have a tool here that we could use. And to close here, as we are talking about area-based control programs or eradication programs, when one hair gets infected in a very dense area, we are expecting that a few days or weeks later, that hair will infect the neighbor hairs, and maybe soon after these hairs will get infected too. So what I'm saying is that if we could mass vaccinate a whole area, and be very aggressive with that exposure or vaccination, then if we get infected one hair, maybe that hair will infect the neighbor hair, but we will reduce the chances of transmission to other hairs. Of course, we have to do the hair closure here, we have to do the partial depopulation, we have to put in place all the measures that we know now. But it's possible that giving a little bit more of resistance or reducing the susceptibility of the surrounding populations and reducing the magnitude and duration of the shedding of those populations, we could work into a regional eradication program. I want to thank Ray Phillips, Dale Paulson, Dale Johnston, Boehringer for the support for these two projects, General Pork, who provided the animals, Multax Lab, Minnesota Diagnostic Lab, Minnesota Farms in Appleton, and the Rowdy students of the Swine Group for all the help.